Jennie, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you. Thank you for spending time with us. And really, just to kick things off, let's talk about you and Levi for just a minute, how you met and how long you guys have been married.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to get to be here with you. Levi and I have been married. It'll be 16 years this year. And we met in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was the assistant to the youth pastor, and I was involved in our missions organization in the church that we were both a part of. And so we met serving in youth ministry together. And it was actually really, really cool because I was in the middle of an internship where one of the guidelines was no romantic dating relationships.
Of course.
So I met Levi halfway through that year, and he hadn't made that same commitment. And so it was so funny because he was like always in my office, and yes, we were talking youth ministry, but it was very obvious that he was like into me. And it's just God's timing. Sometimes it seems so off and so weird, but his timing's always so perfect. And it really caused us to be able to have a friendship without the pressure of, is he going to ask me out? Because I knew he wasn't, because he was honoring my decision that I made. And so we just served God together, and we were friends. And then the day my internship ended, he asked me out on our first date. And
he could not wait, right? Oh, that's a great story. Yeah, I mean, that would be, I know other people have been in that situation. One couple I think of, and that's tough when you think, I really like this person, especially as a guy. I mean, you want to take her out and pursue her and all that good stuff.
Totally.
So a lot of meetings with him, right?
Yes.
all that kind of stuff. Well, the book is incredible. I've heard your story from Levi in the past, and grief is such a difficult thing. So after you lost her in 2012, what made you lean into God and choose to fight to flourish?
Well, honestly, I think it was something that God had already been preparing us for before she even went to heaven. And it's interesting because, I mean, you don't think of it like that, like, oh, God was preparing me for the worst day of my life, but he's always moving, and he's always working, and he's always doing things deep down that we can't see most of the time. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even in little things like even the week before Lenny went to heaven, Levi and I were on a trip together, and we were in the habit of getting away a little bit every year, and date nights and all that stuff. And there was just a night where we were at a church service, and God just used someone to speak life over me in just a real sweet, special way that I had never really experienced before. But literally a week later, Lenya goes to heaven, and those things that was spoken over me was just like resounding in my heart. And it was just those little tiny things that God was reminding me that he was with me, and that he loved me, and that I wasn't alone. And so I think it's honestly, I think the key to life in general is just the steady consistency in the little things every day. Because it's like Eugene Peterson wrote a book, and he talks about a long obedience in the same direction. And really that's the key to a flourishing life is trusting God step by step and moment by moment, and believing that he's at work deep down in the deep parts of the soil that we can't even see, and we can't even really understand. Maybe even never really understand this side of heaven until we see Jesus face to face. But yeah, I think it was those things of just trusting God. I honestly feel like I had nowhere else to turn to. Like it's like how in the Bible, Jesus' disciples were like, Jesus, where else could we go? Because he was saying, you could go here. Why didn't you go? And they're like, well, you alone speak the words of eternal life. Where else are we going to go? And so it's kind of that thing of like, maybe I would want to run away, but where would I run? Who would I run to? And where would I run to? So
Exactly. That's so good. I love the fact that you pursued him at a time when it was probably hard to pursue at times. Maybe the enemy was telling you things and lies and all that stuff, but what are you saying is just continue to trust him no matter what is going on around you, no matter what other people are saying or the enemy's trying to get you to do, that you just persevere in that trust and that God is there.
yeah, and I think also even maybe more than trusting that he's um, there and in the moment, but also trusting that he has the bigger picture in mind, and
Hmm.
he knows everything from beginning to end. So when I'm in the middle of this struggle and when I'm in the middle of this grief and this difficulty, I maybe can't see the end result or the big picture, but knowing and trusting that God knows, and maybe he didn't make the thing happen that you're walking through, because he doesn't want death. He hates death, but he allows things. And you see all throughout the Bible, you see him allowing his people to go through hard stuff.
Hmm.
And you see just how he gives them the strength and the joy and the power to just keep taking those steps forward through it, and not dodging the pain and not trying to get around it or numb it, but just walking right through the fire, and just how God is there every step of the way.
I love that. I think it is that sometimes we want to avoid the pain, obviously, but that he will walk through that with us, and there is another side out of that.
Yeah.
Uh, is really really powerful. And I think what you said too a minute ago about how God prepared you. I hear that from people a lot in counseling when something tragic happens, and they say, "I didn't know that God was preparing me for that, but when it happened, I can look back and see His hand and His graciousness and His love for me in all of that."
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that.
And He
That's
has a
so good.
great
He's so
plan.
kind.
Yeah, it's so good. So one of the things I love in the book is your active language. You talk about fight to flourish. You talk about use words fight, engage, suit up, engage in the struggle, find your grit, shake out up the freshness, keep your guard up, stir up the sweetness, show up and stand out. All of these things point to us doing something. So when we look at walking through grief and pain and struggle, they require action on our part. Why?
Gosh, that's so good. It's a good question. I think so often, at least in my upbringing, a lot of like phrases were like, let go and let God, and like, don't don't try to make things happen. God will, which I do. I honestly believe both those things. And I think that God is ultimately in control, and he's the one, like the Bible says, who raises up, and he's the one who brings low. Like, exaltation comes from the Lord. Like, he's in control ultimately. But there's also this, and even with salvation, and God's the one that freely gives it. It's nothing that we
Hmm.
work for. We didn't work hard to get where we're at. We just believed and received that Jesus is the one who lived and died and rose again, and he's our salvation. And so there's even that tension. I feel like a lot of my book does have that tension where it's like the good and the hard,
Hmm.
and not working for salvation, but working really hard to fight for honor and to fight to live this kind of flourishing life that God's called us to live. And so I just see how the Bible, I mean, a lot of those words and images that you were just talking about come straight from the Bible, where in Hebrews, he's talking about running this race. And I
Hmm.
don't know if anyone's run before, but that's actually really hard. And I do not enjoy it personally. I know what it does for my full body workout is amazing, but there's work that goes into running, and running to win. And I think that's like kind of a next level
Sure.
of living this life intently and focused on what God has for us to do and how we can fight to flourish in this life, is just that added intensity of running to win. And I kind of talk about it a little bit, but there's a difference between running, and I have a friend who trail runs, and it's like enjoying the scenery and kind of running. And obviously you're sweating and getting a good workout, but it's not like you're on a track and you are running and you're trying to get rid of seconds and shedding off anything that's holding you back, and you're leaning in and you're like posturing your head forward so you can be the first one to run through the finish line. And I think there's just that added intensity where this life is such a fight. And for me personally, I think that flourishing can be so unrelatable at times. That the word is so beautiful, and I want it to describe my life, but I think so often it seems so unrelatable, especially when we feel like we're failing. But when I point to is that that's exactly it. I think sometimes our definition of what flourishing is just seems so like, oh, well, in heaven I'll be flourishing, and maybe when I'm older and wiser. Or I mean, that's even like in the process of writing this book, like I tried to quit multiple times because it was so difficult. I have 4 little kids and leading a church with my husband, and it was not easy, but just the idea of fighting forward and fighting through, and knowing that when we say yes to Jesus and we say, God, I believe you, and I know that I can't save myself and I can't go to heaven without you, that's the start of this process called sanctification. And basically that's this whole life from now forward, where the Bible talks about us being made more and more and more like Jesus. So it's this very arduous, like long process. And going back to what we said earlier of just that long obedience in the same direction, there's this flourishing that we're meant to take place, becoming more like Jesus. But I think so often the connection of where I'm at now and what that looks like. Yes, when I see him face to face, I'll be perfectly pure in his presence, and I won't be dealing with struggles, and I won't be dealing with grief, and there's no more tears and no more pain. But what about from here until then? And what does that even look like to flourish as a mom, and to flourish as a wife, and as a leader and a teacher and a student? Like, what does that even mean? And I just believe that all these action words that you mentioned is part of just this fighting forward, and fighting to not be the lazy person that I so naturally am, but to fight in my marriage, to fight to respect and honor Levi, and to think outside of myself, and to not think so selfishly, but to think of him more than myself. And honestly, it's just that kind of permeates into every area of my life personally. And so I just totally went off in a lot of different directions, but
it's good, because I think, I really had never before this thought of the word flourish in the way that you portray it. And it's a great word. I mean, it really is a great word. And I love it. And I love thinking that we flourish now, because I think sometimes, especially when we go through hard times, we think, well, I'll be okay when I get to heaven. But, God has us here for a purpose. And of course, I love the action steps anyway, because I identify a lot with Peter. I think I've been jumping out of the boat too, and all that kind of stuff, just because the hard part for me is the waiting, or the, listening. Those are the things I really have to focus on. I love the doing part, but I know too, there's a balance there for us.
Totally.
In some way.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think it's trusting and working. My husband always talks about, as we're leading our church, he's like, trust God for what only he can do. He's the only one who can save souls and touch a heart and bring life change. But we have to do everything we can do, which is plan and schedule and practice and all the things that it takes to put on a church service with everything that we've got, but then also know that we're holding it lightly, because God could intervene and the Holy Spirit could move in a special way. And so it's just that tension of work and trust. And it's really beautiful. I think so often when things are hard, we think that we're doing it wrong or whatever, but it's like sometimes, and most of the time in my life I've experienced, is that it's the good and the hard kind of meshed together and kind of like pulling. There's just that beautiful tension, and that's kind of life, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it is. It's I love the way you put it there. And yeah, I think just we do have to do. I mean, it's God gives us things to do here, and and then my biggest deal is trying not to get in his way, because sometimes
I know,
I can
right?
take off and just go and think, Oh man, I didn't stop to ask him about that part. Did I? Did I go somewhere he didn't want me to go? And
Ahead
so,
of myself there.
just I love it because I love ministry because it's always a learning experience, and knowing that I'll never get there in ministry, but he knows where he's taken it. And
Yeah.
what he's done, like with you guys in your church, and how he's using you guys, and how he's using awesome marriage, and that God just does things far beyond what we can even think or imagine. And that is so true. He's
It's
so
so
true.
beautiful. Yeah.
Let's talk about just what happens to marriages when something like this happens. Statistically, most marriages don't survive the loss of a child. What can you share that you and Levi did? How did you guys survive it?
Hmm. God's grace. Honestly, Levi will often say, like, a tragedy or difficulty doesn't create a good marriage, but it just reveals what was already there. So
Hmm.
if you're struggling in your marriage, a tragedy like this will just kind of expose that there isn't a great foundation. Not that there isn't hope for that couple, because there's always hope, but it just opens up the ability to see the actual foundation and if it's strong or not. And so if you have a strong marriage, it opens up and shows you, okay, there is a good foundation. It feels like everything was knocked down and destroyed and burnt down, but we have a good foundation. And honestly, I mean, I'm so thankful that we had a good foundation. And I mean,
Hmm.
even going back to your first question of our relationship that we had before we even ever started dating, I point back to that, of just that sweet friendship that was, yeah, maybe we were attracted to each other, but there wasn't the pressure of dating or physicalness. It was pure, like, relationship and friendship. And
Hmm.
which I'm so thankful for, because it really gave us a great friendship and foundation of just being friends. And I think even for those who aren't married yet, just seeing that the beauty of the friendships with I mean, like, if you're a girl with your girlfriends, like, just the beauty of that. But then also really focusing on that friendship if you are dating, like, it's so important. You never get that time back where you're just friends and just focusing on that friendship. If you go on to get engaged and married, it's like, it's such a special time. But all that to say, I think we also had little rhythms in place where date nights were super important. And sometimes it was going out to dinner, and sometimes it was walking around Costco, and sometimes it was taking a walk. Like, I think you can make date night super fun in the sense that you can just change it up and do a workout
Sure.
date. We just did a workout date night the other night because we're getting ready to hike Mount St. Helens with a friend. And so we're like doing the
Oh,
stair
wow.
for,
Yeah.
but anyways, I think that was a rhythm for us, a rhythm of getting away. I think when you're in the season with little kids, it's so challenging because they need you as the mom, like, they need you all the time. But little times where you can get away and have people who watch your kids, is just, that's always so good, those little refreshing moments. But as we grieved, I think one of the things, we had a couple who were very close to us. Their 33-year-old son had died the summer before Lenya went to heaven. And we, like, walked with them through their grief. And I honestly, personally, just observed, like, so much what they went through. And they had
Hmm.
been married for 30 years. And but I just observed how patient the wife was with her husband, and vice versa. And I know, and we had seen them go through, like, very difficult times with each other, but for the most part, like, they were just giving and receiving, and it was patience with their different levels of grief. Because I think that's what's so interesting about grief, is that it hits people in different ways, because it also brings up the past, and it brings up stuff that maybe you
Sure.
haven't dealt with before. And so it's not just what the grief of and the loss of the person, but it's also the other stuff that it brings up to the surface if it hasn't been dealt with in healthy ways. And so one spouse will be having a really good day, quote unquote, and then the other one is not. And so I think it's just that kind of ebbing and flowing and flexibility and grace, honestly, where you can just see each other and see each other's perspective. And we did not do this perfectly. There were plenty of times and still where we're, for me, I'm speaking for myself, but thinking more selfishly and thinking more inwardly and not aware of Levi and where he's at and his needs. And honestly, I mean, we have friends right now who are on the brink of divorce, and they lost a child, and it's just so heartbreaking because part of me is like, it's so simple. You guys, like, just be less selfish and think of each other. And it's like, but obviously that's always so much harder to do than to act out. But it just is, it aches when you know that they have other kids and they've both walked through this painful thing, and maybe they haven't both dealt with it the way they need to, but now they're kind of resenting each other, and then there's no longer that sweetness and that relationship. It's just focusing on their own thing. So bringing it back to us, I feel like it was just learning more and more. And like you said earlier, it's like, I'm constantly learning this. I think that's part of why flourishing can be such a discouraging thing sometimes, because it's like, man, I'm 38 years old and I've been married for almost 16 years. Like, why can't I learn this being selfless by now? Like, why am I still struggling with this? And why am I still always thinking about myself? And I think it's just, honestly, it's this constant coming back to Jesus and remembering that we aren't called to try to muscle this out on our own, but we're called to run to God and say, God, I can't do this on my own strength. I need you today. I need you to give me the compassion for my husband, and I need you to give me a sweetness in my spirit. I don't want to be someone who's bitter and carrying along this pain and this grief and loss, whatever kind of grief and loss it is, which could be divorce, which could be so many different kinds of things that we grieve. But really, I just think the key is just showing up first of all, but then also just relying on God's strength. Because I know for me, I really can't do anything by myself. I don't have the strength to muster up to try to be the kind wife that I'm supposed to be and the selfless person I'm supposed to be. Like, I need God's perspective, and I need God's strength. And I really have just seen that is so key in any kind of marriage, but definitely the kind of marriage that has experienced tragedy and the loss of a child, for sure.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think it's so powerful. And I love the way you said it. And I don't know if it's encouraging or not, but Nancy and I've been married 50 years and we still fight selfishness, you know?
Yeah, totally. That's amazing.
But God still is always there. And I'm just like you. I've got to go back to him. That's the only way I get out of myself and get to thinking her. But it sounds like, even though you guys obviously didn't do it perfect, as you said, but you guys seem to make a decision some way that you were going to be there for each other, and that you were going to be a team, and that you were going to be intentional about some things that you knew that were important. And so the thing that you mentioned about your friends, that's what I see a lot. The blame thing gets in, and you guys seem to avoided that. And I think maybe because you were so intentional about each other, you weren't sucked into that, which I think a lot of people do.
No, it is a fight to fight those because I think it's a natural tendency to blame, and it's our flesh nature to to not take the blame and not to look inward, but to just look outward and be like, well, if you would have, and if this and
Sure.
like, then that just creates more problems. But I see how I guess one thing that Levi and I have learned is the hard stuff that we go through isn't necessarily an obstacle to the flourishing relationship that we're meant to have as a married couple, but it's actually a deepener and like a conditioner and a strengthener. And if we have the right like perspective in it, and obviously it's usually more you get the perspective afterwards, but like in the heated moment or in the difficulty or in the struggle together, knowing that it's kind of like in video games where you're like, well, maybe the old school video games. I don't really know the most recent ones, but like I'm thinking like Super Mario Brothers, where it's like you have a level and you start at the beginning and you go through and you get as much, but then at the end is this like you're trying to defeat this enemy, and once you defeat it, then you can go on to the next level. And we've just found, I mean, we look back and we just see all the little like hard moments and fights and tragedies and hard times, maybe even not even in our marriage, but just things that were just like pressing down on us without our marriage. Like all those things we look back and we see as we have just pushed through and walked through the hard conversation and walked through the hard moment and through the hard stuff. And like you said, as a team, and I think that's so key, like knowing that we're linked arms together. We're not fighting against each other. We're fighting forward with each other. We've just seen such breakthrough and such depth of relationship when we can just push through together. And at the end, humbly like apologize and honestly say like, when you do this, it really hurts my feelings, or when you said this or whatever, like I feel like God just puts in us more compassion for each other and wanting to love each other better and wanting to prefer each other and hating when I've been selfish. And I just feel like we can actually use the difficulties to our advantage to grow with each other. And but you have to have that perspective, and you have to have that relationship with God. Not it's like an elite relationship, but it's just saying, God, I need you. And I think anyone can say that, and anyone can do that. And so it just creates a sweetness in the relationship. I just watched this movie, and literally the whole movie was all about this couple who's going through a divorce. And honestly, it gave me such just perspective and compassion for what people are struggling through and going through. And it is so heartbreaking. Like, and what I'm sure what you see too is just the hard stuff, but God wants us to have a sweetness in our marriage and a kind of like the childlike faith that he calls us to with him. It's kind of that same kind of just fun, sweet child. I mean, you just sometimes I picture Levi as like kindergarten, when he was in kindergarten. I'm like, how amazing would that be to just be like running around and like hitting each other. And, like, I think there's obviously their maturity is important, but just that childlike fun and laughing at each other and not taking yourself so seriously, but taking your relationship seriously. I think those kind of things are what has helped me for sure.
Yeah, that's so good because it's practical. And I think the other thing is that I love what you said about when you go to, I think sometimes we complicate going to God. And when you just said, God, I need you. And that's all you need to do. And my experience is when we do that and it's from our heart, he shows up.
Yes.
Every time.
Yeah.
So are there any things that you would say, practical ways that, let's kind of break it down, that Levi really supported you through this, and some practical ways that you supported him?
Well, I mean, one of the things was that we had a great crew of people around us. And I think that's part of being planted in a church, and just having the right people there, and there at the hospital, and there when you're at home and you don't know what to do, and someone bringing a meal. Like, I think that's a key thing of just in general, a practical thing of just when you're a part of a church, and you're in a small group or whatever that looks like, I think that's so key. You just have the right people around you. But I would say, I think Levi, I mean, he's so patient, I feel like he was definitely more understanding with me when I would be having a hard time, and he would kind of give me my space, let me, I mean, he was there for me, but he realized that I probably needed to like go take a drive or
Mm.
go get a massage, or I don't know, like just go for a walk, or um he is aware of that. And I think for me to him, um I think knowing each other's like love languages, in the sense of
Hmm.
like, or even like strengths and weaknesses, like what fuels you, what depletes you, what's refreshing. I know for him, well, at that time it was like going on bike rides, or um, working out, or just like going on a walk. He went on a lot of walks
Mm.
at the beginning, and that was kind of a way for him to kind of talk to God and flesh it out and cry it out and all that kind of stuff. I know that was a huge healing thing for him to do. And so
Mm.
for me, not like holding it against him, like, man, you need to have like your alone time, but letting, like, being like, oh my gosh, go, and I'll be with the kids or whatever. I think it's just that, it's that give and take,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and I think it's also let each other grieve in the way each other needed to grieve. You
Yeah.
didn't try to make Levi grieve the way you were grieving, and he didn't try to make you grieve the way he was grieving. That you let each other grieve in whatever way that took. I think that's really important, because it seems my experience is we all grieve in some different ways.
Yes.
There's just things that work for one person, and I think that the difference between a father and a mother in a situation that like that is, I mean, you're the one who carried her for 9 months, and you were the one who was, all those things that a mom does that connects her, and yet a dad with his daughter. I mean, I know how that feels, and it's different how you grieve in that, and the sense of loss, and what you lost and what Levi lost, and I think it's so important that you let each other grieve in their own way.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, that is a constant, like, perspective check too. Cause I mean, we did not do that perfectly, but we learned, we learned over time
Sure.
that was so important. But, um, um, yeah, I just, yeah,
Yeah, and I think one thing I wanted to just hit again that you said, and that was important to being in a community or in a small group. And I tell people that all the time, and they'll say, "Why do I need a small group?" And I think sometimes you don't know you need a small group until you need it. And then you guys saw what it meant to be in the community of a church, and to have people surround you and love you and all those kind of things. I mean, I mean, our small group is fun, and we have a great time together. But when one of them lost a parent, we were there,
yeah.
and something happens, or you struggle with something with a child, you're there to support and help each other. And I don't see how people go through it without that, honestly.
No,
It's so much more difficult. Yeah.
oh yeah, you don't, I mean, someone who's beating you to the hospital and there and wait, like someone who has a meal, and even those kind of things, of just the simple thing of like someone making a meal. Like, you don't know you need someone to stop by and bring you enchiladas until like, okay, I didn't even think about dinner. And it's just
Right.
like that kind of stuff. And it's interesting, this past weekend, actually, a couple in our church, part of their house burned down.
Mm.
Um, but immediately their small group was there and like helping him grab stuff out. And even that week, like this weekend at church, this couple showed up, and they sat in and they worshiped and they listened to the message, and God spoke to them. And then the next, they just kept doing what they always did. And then the next service, they served in the kids class, like,
Uh,
and she brought donuts because it was a holiday. Like, it's like when you can get in that rhythm, the worst thing can happen. And it's like, well, where else am I going to go on Sunday? Like, am I just going to stay?
yeah.
So it's like, I'm going to show up because I know I need a touch from God, and I know I need a touch from God in the presence of other people. Like, my husband has mentioned this before, but there's something special that happens when you gather together and receive God's word together. Because there's almost like this accountability. It's like you're hearing God's word, and it's touching you in a way that is only for you, because that's how God's word works. Like,
Sure.
it speaks so specifically and perfectly to each person who's ready to receive it. But then you get it together as a group, and then when you, even that the next week or whatever, can gather with your small group and talk about it, I don't know, like there's like a multi-dimensional reception of what God's speaking to you. Obviously, we want to be reading the word on our own, but then when you receive it with other people, there's just, God moves just so beautifully in that.
Yeah, and I love, like, when that with our small group, and even with Nancy, when we both hear the same message or read something the same, but how did God use that in her life in a different way than mine? And to me, that is, and in other people in our small group, and you think, as you're sharing, you realize, God, this God's word's amazing. It touched me in this way, it touched them in that way, it touched my wife in a different way. And so I think having community to share that with strengthens our faith. It does
Yeah.
mine. It just helps me see, again, how loving and good and amazing our God is.
Yeah. No,
When
it's
things like that happen.
so true.
Let's talk just a little about when God's silent in the midst of pain. You talk about this picture of what we feel like God's giving us, the silent treatment. Can you share about that?
Yeah. So in my experience, when Lenny went to heaven, there was a nearness to heaven. There was it was almost like I could hear God so clearly telling me that he loves me and that he's with me. And I mean, the Bible says that he's near to the brokenhearted. So we just experienced that so vividly and tangibly. Like we were brokenhearted, we were defeated, we were at our worst, and we felt God so near. And that was through God's word and people in our lives, and just feeling like, man, heaven is so much closer than we thought. And we had always talked about heaven, but it felt even closer. And it was almost like the veil between heaven and earth was just like, kind of, the effects of it were just kind of hitting, in the sense of like, I could feel that eternity is at hand. And it wasn't, it's not like heaven is this crazy far off place, but it's actually near. And I mean, that's a whole other conversation, I guess. But as far as the silent treatment, I guess maybe a few years passed. And honestly, I mean, so going back a little bit, right after Lenny went to heaven, she went to heaven 5 days before Christmas, 2012. And my husband all that day had been studying and prepping for his Christmas Eve message. And we still, I mean, 3 days later, still went, and my husband still preached, and we were worshiping God together with our church. Like, again, there's no other place we would rather be. And so that even kind of launched us even into this more intense, like, okay, we're going to do more, and we're going to reach more people, and because who knows how long we have. And so there was an even ratcheted up like intensity to what God had called us to, of reaching people in Montana and beyond, and touring and telling our story and all this stuff. And it was amazing. And I feel like a few years had passed, and it just, it wasn't like we weren't in church and doing the things we had always done, but I just kind of felt like it was almost like a wall had been put up between me and God. And it felt like I was kind of going through the motions of things, but not feeling that nearness to him. And I think it's hard when you're even leading a church, because you're like, wait, aren't I supposed to feel God? And aren't I supposed to feel like wanting to go to church and feel like leading and feel like, but I felt like all those feelings were just like kind of not there. And I think so often, even in this culture of you got to be authentic and be your true self and follow your heart. Like, I think sometimes it's just show up, and maybe the feelings aren't there, but it's not about our feelings. And it's not like, I think for me, I'm a feeler. Levi has like no feeling at all. And it's not a bad way, but he's like he's majorly a visionary. He's always seeing the
Right.
future and always like perspective. But I feel like when someone walks in a room and I see that they look sad, I'm like, I'm feeling that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, does anyone else feel that? And, but sometimes it's annoying because I can so tend to go by my feelings. Like if I'm feeling sad, like I can let that totally overtake me. If I'm feeling mad, all these things, like, but I found in that season that it wasn't about my feelings of, do I feel like God is near? Do I feel all those same feelings I had when Lenny went to heaven and I felt like I could conquer the world because God was with me and he loved me, blah, blah, blah. And I just was kind of digging into that a little bit and found that there are actually so many examples in the Bible where people felt like God had abandoned them. I mean, you just think there's so many prophets where they were like wanting to kill themselves because they felt like they didn't know where God was and they were alone. And, but all the while God was moving underneath the surface, but they just didn't know it. And so the Bible talks about there's refuge in the shadow of your wings. And it talks about God's wings. And I don't necessarily think God actually has wings. Maybe he does. I don't know. But like that vivid imagery of being safe in God, under the shadow of God's wings. And I was thinking of a shadow, and a shadow is generally dark, and a shadow, I think usually you can't really see much because you're in the shade. But I think the beauty about being in the shadow of his wings is that you're actually near. You're near to God, whether you feel it or not. And you might feel like you're in a dark place. You might feel like he's gone. But when you're safe in the shadow of his wing, you're actually nearest to his heart. And I think so often we just have to remember that it's not our feelings that are leading us, but it's trusting God and knowing that he has us even when there's seemingly a silence and seemingly a distance. And I mean, even you picture relationships like in marriage, for example, like you're not always going to feel the same way you did when you first met each other. And then when you first started holding hands, and then when you first kissed, and then when you got married, like there's just so many different, as you look back, so many different emotions. And I think God will, I mean, I've experienced like sometimes those feelings actually deepen, and they may not feel so like sparkly and like fireworky, but there's a depth, there's a gone through hard stuff together, and there's a love that just is deepening. But if we always felt those same like sparkler feelings at the beginning, I don't think that could sustain us throughout our whole life. Like we're meant to go deeper and to not always have that not frivolous feeling, but yeah. Anyways, I just feel like it's that deepening with God that sometimes he may seem far or he may seem silent, but it's deepening our trust in him. Because if we can say, God, I don't understand this. I don't even know where you are right now, but I trust you and I know that you're there because you are God and you are good and you love me. And I don't see you and I don't know, but I trust you. And I think it's in those moments where you grow. And so, and I even picture like a seed being planted in the dirt. And I mean, you just picture that little insignificant seed in the dirt, and it's like dark and you can't see anything and you don't even know what's going on. And am I supposed to grow, or I'm just going to stay here? Am I ever going to see like the light? But God has a plan throughout that whole process. And I think that's one thing, even with this whole idea of flourishing, is that you don't have to wait to be this huge rose bush with all these beautiful roses to be flourishing. Like part of the process of flourishing is actually right now when you feel like you're in the dark and you're a little seed and there's just this tiny little sprout coming out of the seed. That's flourishing because you're in the process of growing and you're in the process of becoming what you're meant to be right now. And I think so often we're like, oh, well, one day I'm going to have a big ministry, or one day I'm going to speak on the platform, or one day I'm going to, and it's like, yeah, maybe that's a dream that God has put in your heart and that will come to pass, but he actually wants to use you right now.
Yeah.
And that requires the weeding and the pruning and the just growing where you are.
Yeah, I love that, because I think we all need to hear that there's times that we do feel his presence, and you just feel like you're on this mountaintop all the time. And just because you don't feel that doesn't mean that God's still not there. And I think that he's not going to abandon us. He says he'll never leave us or forsake us. And so I think we need to know that, because I think I think all of us like feelings.
Yeah.
We like to know, oh yeah, I feel God. Yeah, he's right here with me, man. And then there's those other times that like you were saying, like, where in the world did he go? But he's right here. And I think that's where that's where we grow. I agree with you completely, because that is an act of faith then to say, I know he's here. I don't feel him right now, which I felt like I did a month ago, but I don't. But God's here, and that's part of our growth in him. And I think that's a hard part for a lot of people.
Yeah.
When that comes, that I think that's kind of you got to push through that and know that God, and not just exist through it, but I love what you said, that you grow through it.
Yeah.
That like the seed in the ground, it's growing and you just don't know it.
Yeah.
And then to be able to see that.
Yeah. And I think so often people will run away from God in the tragedy and run away from God in the trials and difficulties, and almost like, well, if you really loved me, why would you allow this to happen? But when you run away from God, you're running away from the only one who can sustain you and fill you and comfort you and empower you and perfectly love you in the difficulty that you're in. And so it's kind of like what I was saying before. It's like, yeah, I could go that way, the opposite way, but who would I run to? Where would I go? And I think that kind of has to be a little bit of that, like you said, that faith of, okay, I don't understand God, and I hate this, and I don't feel that you're near, but I'm running to you. And so, yeah.
What you mentioned, you said the kind of why. How did you deal with the why questions? How did you deal with them? Did you give them to God? Did you pursue them? What did you do? Because I know that's got to come to everyone when a tragedy comes.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of questions. I mean, she died of an asthma attack. But then later on, we found out that that's such a rare thing for kids to die from. And then my mind starts thinking, well, maybe she had a heart condition, because on Levi's side of the family, his mom and sister had heart conditions when they were little. And then, so anyways, like all these things, when I would allow myself to go down these rabbit trails of why and what if I could have done this, and what if, and all this stuff. And those are never good trails to run down, because they just end in like shame and regret. And honestly, any trail you run down, God's there, and he'll meet you there, and he'll help you and comfort you and be with you. But I think so often I just had to kind of fight off those things. And honestly, that's something that Levi is really good at. Like he has grit and mental toughness. Yep. And he really, honestly, I guess going back to your question about how he helped me, he really helped me have perspective. Because I think, like you said earlier, like being a mom, like you just have so much responsibility and pressure, and she had so many allergies, and just, you just look and you're like, I could have done this, and I should have done this, and why didn't I do this, and and that's just a place that is inward focusing. And I think I had to stop myself, and Levi helped me a lot, stopping myself of thinking that way. I guess I never really asked why. I don't think, I'm trying to even remember. Like, I think I definitely was angry a lot of the time, but I know one of the gifts in the Bible is faith, that the Bible talks about is faith. And I believe that I have that gift. Like, it's easy for me to trust God, I feel like. But honestly, I think I was comforted knowing that God God hated it too, and that he didn't cause it to happen, but that he allowed it to happen. And I think when Levi and I were looking at it as God had a purpose in it, even though he didn't plan it and he allowed it. So it was almost like, who said it? Someone said that God gives his greatest assignments to his most trusted soldiers. Mm. And maybe that was said by someone who was in pain and they needed to hear that. But I do feel like there is kind of that assignment of like, okay, God, I don't understand. And I know I don't need to understand you in order to trust you, but I do trust you. And so I don't know, I guess that probably isn't helpful for someone who may struggle with that. But I guess it's just really knowing that God has a plan, and it's such a simple thing. But I just looked to the book of Job when Satan asked to bug Job and to mess with his life, and all of that tragedy happened to him, and he lost his children, he lost his home, he lost his health, but he still worshiped God, and he still trusted him. And I'm like, we lost a child, and life is hard, and ministry can be hard, but it's like, I guess I always see like it could be worse. It could always be worse, but just seeing someone who's gone through so much and still trusting God is like, yeah, okay, I can do this. And I think that's why it's so beautiful to learn about the people in the Bible, because you see these real life examples of people who messed up and did it wrong, but but God still blessed them, and they still trusted him. And I don't know, I feel like it's a lot of things that beyond my understanding.
I think so. And that's why I kind of wanted you to pursue that a little, because I think I've never had why questions like that get me anywhere good. And I think and I know they come in our mind, but I think if we dwell on them, that's where I think we can get off track. And you can't help something go into your mind, but you can choose what you do with it. And to me, the answer to the why questions is, I don't know, God, but I trust you.
Yes.
Period. And then I'm so glad Job's in the Bible. I mean, I feel, in fact, we're Nancy and I are doing a read through the Bible plan. The one we're doing now is called Blended. And so we're doing Job right now. And it's just, golly, that's just, oh my gosh.
Oh, I know.
All the stuff they go through. And so, but I think too, no matter what we go through, whether you lose everybody like he did, or you lose a child, or whatever you lose, it's a loss and it's grief, and God's our answer. In all of that.
Absolutely.
So if we've got somebody listening today, which I think we have, and they're going through a dark time, maybe it is a lost life, maybe it's a spiritual battle, what would you say to them about the fight that they're in?
Well, I would say right now that it's never too late. I don't know where you're at with trusting God or believing God or thinking that he's there or not, but no matter where you are right now, it's never too late to run to him and to say, like we said earlier, God, I need you. And the thing that I know about God is that he loves us so much. And I just want you to know that he loves you and he wants a relationship with us. And I just picture like our little kids when they run to us. That's God's heart for us, is for us to run to him like that, and to run to him when we don't know what's going on, run to him when we don't understand, run to him with our joys and when life's good, run to him when life's bad. And so I would just encourage you that God is with you and he loves you, and you can turn to him, and he has a plan. And right now, wherever you're at right now, God's heart for you is to flourish and to grow. And I think maybe sometimes we feel like a stub of a tree, or we feel like we haven't even poked through the dirt yet. But there's that fight that God has put in you to flourish and to grow right where you're at, whatever part of the season of life that you're in. God wants to use you right now, and there are people in your life who need to know God's love, and to need to know that there's hope. And I believe that no matter where you are, that God can use you so beautifully and so powerfully as you trust him. And it's never too late to walk with him and to just to take the next step. And I think that's another thing, is just take the next step, take the next breath, and know that you're not alone.
That's so good. It's so good. Yeah. And just giving it a chance. Like you said, I think those of us who've walked with God, certainly not as good as long as I wanted to, but to know that he is there and that he does love us and he does care and that he shows up.
Yeah.
It's worth, and there's no place, like you said, there's no place I'd rather be. And so I agree, encourage people to take that step and to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's close with this. What is one thing that you're enjoying about your marriage to Levi right now, in the midst of, you guys are busy, all that kind of stuff, growing church, all this kind of stuff. So what are you enjoying in your marriage right now?
Oh man, I love the fun. I love like laughing at each other. I think we've found like a new level of fun and enjoyment, and just taking advantage of time that we have with each other, and knowing that we don't know what life has in store for us. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but really getting to enjoy the time that we have, and making the most of it. And he's really good at creating time and space, like, to spend together. And so I think one thing I'm learning and loving is just prioritizing our time together, and knowing that, like, I can't do everything, but I can do something, and I can honor him in a special way. I can, when I think of it, like, text him. I think there's just the creative side, and it's just fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. I love what you said about that Levi intentionally creates time for you. Okay, husbands that are listening, that's what we talk about all the time. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think when we do that, our wives love that.
Yes.
Especially and most of us are busy, and when we're busy and they know, oh my gosh, he thought of me in the midst of everything he's doing. He created this time, or there's something special for me. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and like I said earlier, like, it can be anything. I think sometimes maybe it's intimidating, because it's like, oh my gosh, we need to have a whole evening, and we need to get a sitter, and we need to, like, but really it's like just a moment. Even like, he'll put his phone down and he'll just be like, hey, how are you? And I think those little things, like, go such a long way, because it's like, oh, you care. And then it pushes that back on me too. Like, how am I making it the most out of a 5 minutes or whatever? And
Exactly. And I love that, because sometimes it's just little things, the text, or in the middle, Nancy, after she works out in the morning, and I've usually started working here because I work out earlier than her, but she'll come in with her coffee and we'll just have maybe 10 minutes. And I love that. I love that she takes time to do that. She loves that I put down the computer or whatever I'm doing for 10 minutes, and just looking for those little opportunities. I think sometimes we complicate it, thinking, oh my gosh, we've got to do this big elaborate thing. I think it's consistency in those little things that really connect us.
I agree.
That's so good. This has been great. I love you spending time with us. I love everything you're doing right now. The book is The Fight to Flourish, Engaging in the Struggle to Cultivate the Life You're Born to Live. You're on Instagram. Any other places that people can find you?
Well, our church is Fresh Life Church. So if you go to freshlife.church, it's kind of a lot of what we're up to these days. I think I'm on Facebook. I'm never on there. But we're God's doing some great things. We're loving what we get to do. So
yeah, I'll give your husband a plug. Levi is on my podcast list, and I love listening to him. So
he's amazing. And his books, Through the Eyes of a Lion, Swipe Right, I Declare War, are incredible.
They're great books. They're great books. Yeah, I loved all of them. I Declare War was the latest one, right?
Yeah,
it was one I just read. Yeah. So it's good. So they're great people. Thanks for spending time. Appreciate it very much. And thanks for being on Lost Marriage Podcast.
Thank you so much.